tonight we are going to try a bourbon. It's a bourbon that's been aged for 10 years. It's one that I've never had before. I've never had anything from this distiller. It's a smaller, semi-local one that's grown quite a bit lately. I think they just had a fairly recent rebrand and have a lot of different products they released. Today we're going to be trying Trail's End 10-year-old bourbon. Trail's End is produced by Hood River Distillers, and Hood River, they're based out of Hood River, Oregon, and they recently, I think in 2015 or maybe a little bit after that, combined with Clear Creek Distillers or Clear Creek Distillery, and those were the two oldest distillers in Oregon. I believe Hood River Distillers have been around since 1934, really long time. They started off distilling brandy from some of the leftover fruit from different harvests, mainly apple, maybe pears. I know apple, I'm not sure what the other one was. Now they have really branched out into all different sorts of spirits. They do Big Gin, I think is by them. They do different vodkas. They do Trail's End is their bourbon. They do McCarthy's American Single Malt. That's one that I've heard of before, and several others too. You can check out their website to see what they do, but they're really getting into it, and I think they also offer they let other folks do contract like bottling and blending and filtration at their facility too. So they're doing a whole lot of stuff, but one thing they're not doing is distilling their own bourbon is one thing we figured out here. So this is actually a sourced bourbon, and let's just take a look at the label here. So it starts off saying, it's Trail's End 10, special reserve, whatever that means, 105 proof. It's crafted with 10-year Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, finished in Oregon oak casks. Now let's get into what they say here. Not all bourbons are content to remain in Kentucky. Trail's End 10 serves a greater ambition. A select few barrels of 10-year Kentucky bourbon follow the spiritual path of the Oregon Trail. Here we finish our bourbon in toasted Oregon Gary oak casks to heighten the notes of vanilla and spice. Glacier-fed spring water from Mount Hood completes the vision of our master distiller, a rare bourbon with hallmarks of age and heritage that flourishes with a providence of its own. Non-chill filtered, 52.5% ABV. Okay, and it's produced and bottled by Hood River Distillers, Inc. in Oregon. So, what do we know from all that fluff? So, we know that it's 10-year Kentucky bourbon finished in Oregon oak casks. So, it's distilled and aged in Kentucky and then finished in these Oregon casks, which are made of Garryana oak, which is pretty rare, pretty different, and it's toasted oak at that. So, the only other whiskey I've had that has been aged to any degree in Garryana oak is the Westland Garryana. I've had the 5th and 6th edition of that. They're very different, and they're going to be hard to compare to this because those are single malts aged and finished in all sorts of different second use barrels, whereas this is a bourbon that's just finished in toasted Gary oak barrels. Toasted, I'm really curious to see how that affects it because I've never had a toasted Gary oak barrel before or a bourbon or any whiskey that's been aged in it. That usually gives sweeter vanilla caramel, like it amplifies really the sweet flavors that you often get from a bourbon and makes it taste almost like marshmallowy or like s'mores. So curious to see if it does the same thing with this. I've had the 8 before. Definitely remember it being sweeter. I've never had this 10. The rumor is, at least as a couple of years ago, that they sourced their bourbon from Heaven Hill, but we don't really know. Maybe we'll be able to taste it and figure it out. So let's break into this one. This bottle's absolutely gorgeous. Pretty hefty. It's embossed on the back with Trail's End. Gorgeous label here that's textured. Really cool presentation. I think this cost around 70 or 80 before tax, so it's definitely not cheap. All right, and let's see here what we got. This reminds me of other toasted oaks I've had, maybe with a bit more spice to it. Just reminds me of like a s'more, like there's like a graham crackery sweetness. Oh, it's really good. With like sweet syrup on top. Almost a maple, but not quite. It's more sweet. And a little bit of, a little bit of spiciness on it. Yeah, let's give it a taste. This is a really cool bourbon. I'm not the biggest fan of double oaked or toasted oaked bourbons. And I should say what that means is with normal casks that your barrels that you age bourbon in, age whiskey in to make it bourbon, they're charred on the inside to varying degrees based on the amount of time that you char them for. But toasted barrels, which are sometimes used to finish bourbon in after it's become straight bourbon, been aged for at least 2 years, they're more or less baked. And that process allows some of the sweeter flavors, like vanilla in particular, to be imparted more into the bourbon with less timed aging. That's why they're just kind of finished in these toasted oak usually. But when I taste those, or the ones that I've had, most of them are fairly one note, or they're really overpowering with the sweetness, and so it's hard to get at the other notes, or they're not present enough to really affect the experience enough to make it better. This is really interesting because I don't know if it's the Gary oak, I would assume so, or I don't know. You get that awesome nose from the toasted oak, like this marshmallow fluff, graham crackery smell that's just sweet and amazing. But on the front palate, you get that too, but it quickly develops into this like peppery nutmeg, just like a prickly spice that I often find to be really, really lacking in toasted oak or double barrel bourbons. Maybe like a smidge of nuttiness. This is very good. Yeah, wow. The more I taste this, the more I like it. It's just there's so much going on. I don't know if my expectations were low or not. I was curious about the Gary oak for sure, but I think this proof 105 is perfect. It's viscous. It doesn't really bite. You feel it though, and man, that getting that sweetness coupled with this prickly spice it just makes for a really good experience. I really, really enjoy this. I'm very pleasantly surprised by it. If I had to give that a score, just based on, the quality alone, I'd say that's probably like an 8.5. That's really good. I like it an awful lot. If we're talking about the value, like all things considered, the complete package, the presentation, how much it costs, how rare it is, easy to find, stuff like that, I'd say this is probably, an A-, because it's good, it's interesting, it's surprising, the proof is solid, not crazy high, but it drinks fairly easy for being over 100 proof, I think. But there's just a lot going on. It keeps you on your toes, tastes really good, but it is 60, 70 bucks. So I think that knocks it back from being an A. So I'd say A-, maybe B+. This gets better as it ages. I know Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel, another toasted barrel product from Heaven Hill. If this is also from Heaven Hill, for me, that always got better as it aged. So if this one does, I'd say, yeah, whole solid at A-, maybe an A. But if it doesn't or gets worse as it ages, something weird gets introduced to it, some weird flavor note, I'd say probably okay, maybe down to a B-, something like that for value. But as far as the whiskey itself, solid 8.5 for me. Really good. Well, hope you get a chance to try this stuff. Hope you like it too. Let me know what you think about it. I really like it. Pleasant surprise. I'm not sure how distribution is on this, but for those of us in the Pacific Northwest, should be easy enough to find. Leave a comment. If you like this video, please give it a like. Definitely subscribe. Cheers. Have a good one.